Well, welcome to the third week of our message series called Snakes and Doves, Clever Christianity, Blameless Believers. Now, in case you haven't been with us over the last couple of weeks, this series is about how people of faith can be creative and effective in a world that is often indifferent or even hostile to religion, without compromising their values and beliefs. It's based on Jesus' own instruction to his disciples in the Gospel of Matthew to be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. And actually, that's not the only time Jesus recommended cleverness. At one point, he told a parable about a money manager who worked for a very wealthy man. And when he was about to be fired for embezzlement, he approached the people who owed money to his boss and offered to write off part of the debt so that when he lost his job, at least they would take care of him out of gratitude. And after telling the parable, Jesus seems to commend the money manager's actions when he says that the children of this world are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. In other words, Jesus suggests that his own followers be as clever as that unjust steward. Now, of course, most spiritual people don't consider themselves to be crafty or shrewd because, well, it sounds so devious. But Jesus didn't mean for his followers to be dishonest or underhanded. To be clever just means being quick to understand the circumstances that you're facing, smart in figuring out creative and intelligent solutions, and able to pivot quickly and apply those solutions to the circumstances in order to move the kingdom of God forward. And to be innocent means doing all of that in a way that honors God. Now, so far in this series, we've acknowledged first and foremost that the responsibility of bringing peace, healing, and love into this world is primarily ours. It has been delegated to us by God, and we cannot shirk that duty nor prove ineffective in accomplishing it. And as we said last week, now more than ever, amid the uncontrolled fear running rampant in our world today, we need to find clever and creative ways to calm the storms of human controversy and bring peace to conflict. Now, today, I want to start off this third week of the series on a slightly different note. I want to, first of all, help you with your love life. You may be wondering what a celibate priest would know about romance, but let me tell you, I am consulted regularly on this topic. So, for those of you who are single and have a crush on someone, but they act like you don't exist, here's a great piece of advice. You can make anyone fall in love with you simply by ignoring them. That's right. Make yourself unavailable. It's a surefire strategy because according to leading experts in the field, you actually increase your value to someone by not always being around. The quickest way to get people to want something and to do something you want is by limiting that thing's availability. Increase the price of tickets to an event and call it exclusive VIP seating, and you're sure to sell out. Restrict the availability of a product, and all of a sudden, sales start to skyrocket. Make something available for a limited time only, and your phone will not stop ringing. That's because we all want what we can't have. And we all have a deep-seated fear of missing out. When others have something we don't, we jealously desire it all the more. St. Paul understood that. In one of the most beautiful passages he ever wrote, Paul says that he's heartbroken because the Jewish people, by and large, refused to accept Jesus. See, Paul had been preaching all over the known world at that time. Thousands and thousands of people were coming to the faith. Their lives had been changed. They were finding forgiveness and freedom. meaning and purpose in ways that it only dreamed of before. The grace of God was moving powerfully in these nascent Christian communities. Spiritual gifts abounded. The rich cared for the poor in ways that were unimaginable before Christianity. Believers were of one mind and heart and shared everything in common. Things were not perfect, of course, but the way of Christ overall was a powerful movement that had ignited and was spreading all over the world like wildfire, except, that is, in Israel and among the Jewish people. And Paul, himself a Jew, was absolutely distraught that the vast majority of his own people had rejected Christ. So what did he do? What was his clever strategy? Ignore them. His strategy was to ignore them. I will glory in my ministry to the Gentiles, he says in today's reading, in order to make my race, meaning the Jews, jealous, and thus save some of them. And he did that because Paul knew that jealousy is a powerful motivator, and people want what they cannot have. The woman in the gospel story today wanted what she could not have. She begged Jesus to heal her daughter. But the woman was not a Jew. In fact, Matthew refers to her as a Canaanite, which was actually a very disparaging term, more like a racial epithet. See, the Canaanites were a fierce people who worshipped pagan gods. And when the ancient Israelites entered the Promised Land over 1,000 years earlier, the Canaanites became their arch enemies. And so, as you can imagine, this woman, in the minds of the Jewish people and Jesus' own disciples, could not have been less deserving of his attention. And so Jesus told her the unvarnished truth. I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, he said. In other words, not to foreigners, and certainly not to Canaanites. But the woman came and did Jesus homage, saying, Lord, help me. But still it was to no avail. Jesus said in reply, it is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs. Dogs were despised by the ancient Jewish people. And so, by referring to the Canaanites as dogs, Jesus was making it clear that she was not one of the children of Israel and was not part of God's family, and therefore not entitled to the promises made to God's chosen people. I have no idea whether Jesus intended to make her jealous, but the effect was the same. Her desire to have what she could not have only grew. And so she persisted, undaunted. Please, Lord, she cried out, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters. Then Jesus said to her in reply, O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish. And her daughter was healed from that hour. It's a beautiful example of faith from an unexpected source, all because the woman jealously desired what had been promised exclusively to someone else. Well, I think if people of faith are to be clever and effective in bringing God's peace, healing, and love into the world, we should recognize first and foremost that we do have something people want. They just don't know it yet. Like St. Paul, we have to be clever and make them jealous for it. Now, that doesn't mean playing hard to get or acting like an exclusive club of religious insiders, snubbing people who don't go to church. Precisely the opposite. What it means is recognizing the treasure of our faith and living in a manner consistent with it. If we do that, others will jealously desire what we have. They will recognize the joy and peace in our lives and long for it themselves. That's actually what happened to me in my own faith journey. In my teen years and early 20s, I wanted nothing to do with church, faith, or God. It seemed irrelevant to my life, uninteresting, and frankly, outdated. Until one day, I was standing alone, looking out of the window of my empty apartment, and I was struck by, out of the blue, by an intense desire for something beyond myself. For the first time in my life, I experienced a genuinely transcendent longing. A few weeks later, I found myself in a Catholic church for the first time on a Sunday morning, and I experienced a feeling of coming home that's difficult to describe. I felt God's presence more intensely than ever before. And when I saw people lining up for communion, I longed for it because I could not have it. Week after week, I returned, watching Catholics receive Holy Eucharist. I studied their faces. Sometimes they were radiant with joy. Sometimes they came with literally tears in their eyes. Sometimes they looked guilty. Parents struggled to keep their children in line. The elderly struggled just to get to the head of the line. But they always came with incredible reverence. And I got to tell you, I was jealous. I began to want it so bad. Every Sunday when I knew I couldn't have it, I ached for that moment when I could finally receive the body and blood of Christ and become part of God's family. The fact that I could not have it only made me want it more. I was watching my new favorite TV show on Prime Video the other night. It's a great show. It's called Hannah. And the show follows the journey of a young girl raised in a forest as she evades the relentless pursuit of a rogue CIA agent while trying to figure out who she really is. At one point, Hannah is lost and alone in a strange city, trying to figure things out. Bewildered and frightened, she stumbles into a church. It's warm inside, and the lights are on. The art and the architecture are magnificent. The choir is rehearsing, and the music is sublime. Running for her life, Hannah manages to find, for just a brief moment, an anchor of peace through the open doors of that church. You know, that's a common scene in many movies. If you think about it, you may even be able to think of a number of movies where you've seen this kind of thing. In the middle of chaos and upheaval, the protagonist will enter an empty church and will experience relief from the outside world. A moment of silent prayer, a fleeting encounter with a kind priest who just happens to be in the church cleaning it. Or maybe just a simple brief moment to sort out the confusion. Just a couple of examples. You might remember the 2017 movie Lady Bird, one of my favorites. It's about a 17-year-old girl and the conflicted relationship she has with her mother. Having rejected her Catholic upbringing, she ends up attending college in New York over her mother's repeated objections. And one night, early on, she's hospitalized for drinking heavily. Lady Bird is, the daughter. And then discharged the next morning, she wanders, confused and alone, into a church service and hides in a corner of the balcony. As the music plays, she bursts into tears and ends up calling her mother, thanking her for everything she had ever done for her. Then there's one of my favorites, the classic children's movie, Home Alone. Remember that? Kevin is an 8-year-old boy accidentally left behind by his enormous family traveling at Christmas time. He discovers a plot by 2 burglars to break into the house, and he comes up with a plan to defend his home. But before Kevin takes on the 2 thieves, what does he do? He ducks into a church. It's late afternoon on Christmas Eve. No one else is there except the children's choir, who is rehearsing O Holy Night for the midnight mass later on. And Kevin spots an elderly neighbor that he's always been afraid of. The 2 of them are there alone, each searching for answers in their own lives. And after a brief conversation, Kevin is no longer afraid. He summons the courage to battle the robbers alone and goes off into the dark night. There is something deep within our collective psyche reminding us that amid the turmoil and conflict of our existence, church is one place in life that will always endure. A stable refuge in an ever-changing world. A safe harbor in the storm-tossed oceans of our lives. And that includes a deadly pandemic. We are still here for you, an anchor in the storm. Maybe you were drawn here today because you desire something greater than yourself to believe in. If you don't consider yourself a church person or a religious person, but decided to give church another try, maybe you stumbled across our YouTube page or someone nagged you to watch this live stream service. First of all, we're so glad that you're here. Christians are not perfect. We can be cranky like anyone else. We have the same anxieties and hang-ups as other people. We make the same mistakes, and we seem to always be fighting with one another. But beneath it all, there is a lasting sense of peace that comes from the fundamental beauty, goodness, and truth of our faith, and the feeling of belonging to a spiritual family that at the end of the day will never abandon you. And if that makes you jealous, if that makes you want it all the more, we think that's just great. Because it means we're doing something clever and right. But there is no need to ever feel like a foreigner here. Because in this place, there are no dogs, and certainly no scraps. Only a feast prepared for you by God, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done. Because as the Bible says, God's house shall be called a house of prayer for all. And for those of us who come here every week showing the world that God's house is the best place to be, well, that is the cleverest and most innocent thing we could ever do.